The missing masterpiece. The blueberry pie was Mrs. Higgins' magnum opus. Not just any blueberry pie, mind you. This was the Blue Ribbon Blueberry Bliss, a confection that had taken first prize at the Harmony Creek County Fair for the past 5 years running. Its crust, a delicate latticework of buttery perfection, held within it a bubbling, fragrant symphony of plump blueberries, a whisper of lemon zest, and a secret ingredient she guarded more fiercely than her grandmother's wedding ring. This morning, it was gone. Mrs. Higgins discovered the theft at precisely 7:12 a.m. She'd woken with a song in her heart and the aroma of baking blueberries already dancing in her head, eager to claim her daily slice. But when she entered her pristine, sunshine-yellow kitchen, the usual comforting sight of the pie cooling on the windowsill was replaced by an unnerving emptiness. "Good heavens," she exclaimed, her voice a tremulous whisper. Her hand flew to her chest, her heart performing an anxious tango. It had to be a mistake. Perhaps she'd put it in the refrigerator and simply forgotten. She rummaged through shelves laden with perfectly preserved jams and pickles, peered behind stacks of neatly arranged mason jars, but the pie was nowhere to be found. Panic began to bloom, hot and prickly, in her chest. This wasn't just a missing dessert, it was a missing piece of her soul. The Blue Ribbon Blueberry Bliss wasn't just a pie, it was a symbol of her dedication, her skill, her very identity in Harmony Creek. She called for Winston, her ancient, perpetually grumpy terrier, hoping he might offer some clue, but the dog merely yawned, stretched, and proceeded to lick his hindquarters with a complete lack of urgency. Clearly, he was no help. With trembling hands, she surveyed the scene. The window was closed and latched, as always. The back door, bolted tight. No sign of forced entry. It was as if the pie had simply vanished into thin air. Except, on the windowsill, amidst the lingering scent of blueberries, lay a scattering of crumbs. Not just any crumbs, but golden, buttery crumbs that could only belong to the Blue Ribbon Blueberry Bliss. And then, she caught it, a faint, almost imperceptible whiff of cinnamon. Cinnamon. She never used cinnamon in her blueberry pie. That was sacrilege. Cinnamon, she muttered, her brow furrowed. Who would dare? The implications were horrifying. Someone had not only stolen her masterpiece, but they had also defiled it with cinnamon. It was an act of culinary vandalism, a personal affront of the highest order. Mrs. Higgins grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling with the buttons in her agitation. She had to call Sheriff Brody. This wasn't just a petty theft, this was a crisis of epic proportions. Harmony Creek was a small town, a place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were as rare as hen's teeth. Yet, someone had managed to sneak into her kitchen, pilfer her prize-winning pie, and leave behind a trail of cinnamon-scented breadcrumbs. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Who could be so bold, so audacious, so utterly devoid of respect for a woman and her pie? And more importantly, what were their motives? Was this a prank? A vendetta? Or something far more sinister? A suspect emerges. Officer Brenda Davies bounced on the balls of her feet, the squeak of her new police-issue boots echoing in the otherwise quiet street. "Come on, Kevin, we've been walking for 10 minutes. This is a bakery. How long can it take to steal a pie?" Kevin Miller sighed, adjusting his glasses. He preferred the quiet hum of the precinct to Brenda's boundless energy. "Brenda, it's only been 5 minutes since Mrs. Higgins reported the missing blueberry pie." He adjusted his grip on his notepad. "And we don't even know if it was stolen. Maybe she just misplaced it." Misplaced a whole pie? "Kevin, have you seen Mrs. Higgins' prize-winning blueberry pies? Those things are practically architectural marvels. You don't just misplace a masterpiece." Brenda scanned the street, her eyes darting from the brightly painted storefronts to the scattering of early morning commuters. "Still," Kevin mumbled, "we shouldn't jump to conclusions." Brenda's eyes widened. "Look." She pointed across the street. "Isn't that?" A man stood near the entrance to the bakery, his shoulders hunched as he gazed into the window. He was older, his face etched with lines that spoke of a life lived outdoors. His tweed jacket was rumpled, and a faded scarf was loosely knotted around his neck. A battered canvas bag hung from his shoulder. "Arthur Penhaligon," Kevin murmured, consulting his notepad. "Known to the force. Mostly harmless. A bit eccentric." "Eccentric?" "Kevin, look at him. He's practically casing the joint. And look at that bag. Perfect for concealing a pie." Brenda started across the street, her boots squeaking with renewed vigor. Kevin hurried to catch up. "Brenda, wait. We don't have any evidence." Brenda ignored him, her focus laser-locked on Arthur. The air around them held the promise of fresh bread and brewing coffee, a stark contrast to the sudden tension radiating from Brenda. Arthur, oblivious to their approach, continued to stare into the bakery window, a wistful expression on his face. "Mr. Penhaligon." Brenda's voice sliced through the morning calm. Arthur jumped, startled. He turned, his eyes widening behind thick spectacles. "Oh. Officers. Good morning." His voice was a soft rumble, like distant thunder. "Morning," Brenda said, her tone sharp. "We need to ask you a few questions." Kevin winced. Brenda's approach was direct. He stepped forward, offering a small, apologetic smile. "Just routine, Mr. Penhaligon. A blueberry pie has gone missing from the bakery." Arthur's eyebrows shot up. "A missing pie? Dear me." He glanced back at the bakery window, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Brenda took a step closer, her hands resting on her belt. "We saw you looking in the window. And you have that bag." Arthur's gaze dropped to the canvas bag slung over his shoulder. He hesitated, his fingers twitching nervously at the worn fabric. The scent of warm pastry hung heavy in the air as Brenda's suspicion turned into conviction. Accusations and protests. "Mr. Penhaligon," Brenda announced, her voice a touch louder than necessary, "we need to ask you a few questions about a missing pie." Arthur, who had been meticulously rearranging pebbles in his garden, looked up, his brow furrowed. "A pie? What in blazes are you talking about, Brenda?" "Mrs. Gable's prize-winning blueberry," Brenda clarified, planting her hands on her hips. Kevin shuffled behind her, his gaze fixed on the chipped paint of Arthur's cottage. "Stolen, apparently," Kevin added, his voice barely audible. Arthur scoffed. "Stolen? Why would I steal a pie? I'm perfectly capable of baking my own, thank you very much." He gestured to a stack of chopped wood near his porch. "Been busy with more important things, you see." Brenda's eyes narrowed, missing Arthur's subtle attempt at humor. "Right. And what would those be, Mr. Penhaligon? Preparing for another escapade?" Arthur bristled. "Escapade? I haven't had an escapade in years, Brenda. You know I've been keeping to myself." "That's not what Mrs. Gable said," Brenda countered, though Mrs. Gable hadn't said anything of the sort. The seed of doubt had been planted and was now sprouting tendrils in Brenda's mind. She focused on Arthur's appearance, his perpetually rumpled clothes, the streaks of dirt on his cheek, the way his gray hair stuck out at odd angles. It all screamed, culprit. "Look at you, Arthur," she said, gesturing vaguely. "You're covered in dirt. What have you been up to?" Arthur's eyes flashed with anger. "I was gardening, as I said. Is it now a crime to enjoy a bit of soil?" He stood up straighter, his small frame radiating indignation. "I'm a veteran, young lady. I deserve more respect than this." Kevin, sensing the rising tension, stepped forward slightly. "Brenda, maybe we should." "No, Kevin," Brenda interrupted, her voice firm. "We need to follow procedure. Mr. Penhaligon, where were you between the hours of 10 and 11 this morning?" "Here." Arthur roared, his voice cracking. "Right here, in my garden. I haven't left this property all day. Ask Mrs. Higgins next door, she saw me. Brenda scribbled something in her notepad, though she had no intention of asking Mrs. Higgins just yet. And what about the blueberries, Mr. Penhaligon? Did you happen to come across any blueberries today? Blueberries? Arthur threw his hands up in the air. I grow gooseberries. I loathe blueberries. This is preposterous. He turned and stomped towards his cottage, muttering about young whippersnappers and lack of respect. Mr. Penhaligon, wait. Brenda called out, but Arthur slammed the door behind him, the sound echoing in the quiet street. Brenda sighed. Well, that went well. Back to the scene. The patrol car idled outside Mrs. Higgins' bakery, the scent of burnt sugar hanging heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the savory aroma Brenda Davies had anticipated. Arthur Penhaligon sat slumped in the back, his eyes darting between the two officers. Kevin Miller killed the engine. All right, Arthur, Brenda said, her voice a little too loud. Let's see what Mrs. Higgins has to say, shall we? Arthur mumbled something unintelligible, but followed Brenda out of the car. Kevin trailed behind, a knot forming in his stomach. He still wasn't entirely convinced of Arthur's guilt, but Brenda was already halfway to the bakery door, her eagerness radiating off her like heat from the summer pavement. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, announcing their arrival to the quiet shop. Mrs. Higgins stood behind the counter, her face etched with worry. Flour dusted her apron like a fresh snowfall. Officers, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Is there news? Brenda stepped forward, her badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Mrs. Higgins, we brought Mr. Penhaligon back. We just need you to confirm something for us. She gestured towards the back of the shop, where a refrigerated display case stood open and empty. The pie, Mrs. Higgins. Is it gone? Mrs. Higgins' eyes welled with tears. She shuffled towards the case, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the cold glass. It was right here, she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. My prize-winning blueberry pie. Gone. A wave of awkwardness washed over Kevin. He hadn't expected her to be so upset. He glanced at Arthur, who stood silently near the entrance, his face unreadable. Brenda, however, seemed emboldened by Mrs. Higgins' distress. She turned to Arthur, her voice sharp. Well, Mr. Penhaligon? Care to explain why Mrs. Higgins' pie is missing? Arthur shuffled his feet, his gaze fixed on the floor. I told you, officer, I didn't take any pie. I was just admiring the window display. Admiring it so much you decided to liberate a blueberry masterpiece? Brenda retorted, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Brenda, Kevin interjected softly, let's not jump to conclusions. He turned to Mrs. Higgins, his voice gentle. Mrs. Higgins, was anything else missing? Any signs of forced entry? Mrs. Higgins shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. No, nothing else. Just the pie. The air in the bakery thickened, heavy with suspicion and the lingering scent of phantom blueberries. Arthur remained silent, his posture stiff, radiating a stubborn defiance that fueled Brenda's conviction. Kevin, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He watched Arthur closely, searching for a flicker of guilt, a telltale sign of deception. But all he saw was a weary old man, caught in the crosshairs of a misunderstanding, or perhaps, something far more complex. Searching the cart. Brenda descended on the shopping cart like a badger after grubs. All right, Mr. Penhaligon, let's see what treasures you're hoarding. She clawed through the overflowing contents, sending yellowed newsprint fluttering like nervous butterflies. Headlines shrieked of slashed budgets and champion poodles. Kevin sighed, tugging at his ear. Brenda, perhaps a slightly more organized search. He trailed off as she flung a newspaper section behind her, it landed with a muffled slap near Arthur's worn shoes. Organization is for librarians, Kevin. This is a potential felony. We need to get our hands dirty. From the depths, she retrieved a corroded harmonica, blowing a tentative note that emerged as a reedy groan. Good grief. Sounds like Gramps snoring after Thanksgiving. It clattered back amongst the junk. Arthur, observing from his park bench, remained a study in stillness. Only his eyes, the color of washed-out denim, hinted at something stirring behind his placid facade, a flicker of wry amusement, or perhaps a touch of sorrow. Anything shaped like dessert yet? Brenda asked, her voice muffled by the cart's contents. Kevin knelt beside the overflowing vessel, attempting to bring order to the chaos. He spotted a small, well-loved photo album. Its cover was creased, its corners softened by time. Brenda, be gentle. These seem private. Brenda snatched the album. Privacy is secondary, Kevin. Evidence is paramount. She flipped the cover open. The first image revealed a young soldier, his smile radiant. The aged tones lent the photo an aura of history. Looks like a serviceman, Brenda stated, flipping onward. A woman in a cheerful print dress beamed from the next page, cradling an infant. Then came a series of memories, birthdays, picnics, school plays. A life unfolding in fleeting glimpses. Kevin leaned closer. He probably wouldn't appreciate us rifling through these, Brenda. We haven't even proven a crime. Brenda snapped the album shut, releasing a small puff of dust. We're searching for pilfered pastry, Kevin, not winning a humanitarian award. She dropped the album into the cart. All right, Arthur. Where's the missing confection? Arthur blinked slowly. I told you officers, I have not laid eyes on any pie. Brenda fixed him with a glare, hands planted on her hips. Don't give me that innocent act, old man. We know you took it. Where is it hidden? She plunged her hands back into the cart, pushing aside a threadbare scarf and a battered thermos. It has to be here somewhere. The air hung heavy with the musty scent of age, clinging to the back of their throats. Kevin, suddenly gripped by unease, carefully returned the scattered photos to the album. He couldn't shake the sense that they were barking up the wrong tree, chasing shadows. The vanished pie seemed less significant than the quiet resignation in Arthur's eyes, a lingering dignity that sat uncomfortably alongside Brenda's blunt accusations. A boy's plea. The fluorescent lights of the precinct hummed, a sterile counterpoint to the chaos swirling within Arthur Penhaligon. He sat slumped in a metal chair, his usually bright eyes dulled with confusion. Brenda Davies, clipboard in hand, paced before him like a terrier after a rat. Kevin Miller, leaning against the wall, watched with a growing sense of unease. Suddenly, a small figure darted past Brenda, nearly tripping her. Mr. Penhaligon didn't do it. It was Timmy, all of 10 years old, his face flushed, his voice cracking with urgency. He clutched a half-eaten ice cream cone, melting rapidly in his small fist. Arthur's face softened as he recognized the boy, the one who always peppered him with questions about his medals and stories. Brenda stopped pacing, her brow furrowed. Timmy, what are you doing here? Go home, son. This is police business. But Mr. Penhaligon wouldn't steal anything. Timmy insisted, his lower lip trembling. He helps Mrs. Gable with her groceries, and he always reads to us at the library. He's the nicest man in Port Blossom. Kevin pushed himself off the wall, a flicker of something akin to hope in his eyes. Timmy, did you see anything? Anything at all that might help us understand what happened? Timmy nodded vigorously, ice cream threatening to drip onto the polished floor. I saw him. I saw Mr. Penhaligon walking near the bakery, but he was just looking at the pigeons. He likes the pigeons. He always throws them breadcrumbs. Brenda sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. Kevin, really? We're taking testimony from a kid with an ice cream cone. He probably didn't even see anything clearly. She turned back to Arthur. Look, Penhaligon, this kid is just confused. Why don't you just tell us where you were this morning and save us all some time? I told you, Arthur rasped, his voice hoarse. I was feeding the pigeons. Like I do every Tuesday. Kevin knelt, bringing himself to Timmy's level. Timmy, are you sure it was Mr. Penhaligon? It's important that you tell us the truth. Timmy met Kevin's gaze, his eyes unwavering. It was him. I know it was. He was wearing his blue jacket, the one with the missing button. He pointed a sticky finger at Arthur's chest. Just like that one. Brenda scoffed. A blue jacket? Half the men in this town own a blue jacket. And a missing button? Come on, Timmy. That's hardly conclusive evidence. She stood, hands on her hips. Run along now, Timmy. We appreciate your enthusiasm, but we need to get back to work. She waved dismissively, turning her back on the boy. Timmy's face crumpled. He looked from Brenda to Kevin, then back to Arthur, his eyes pleading. But he's a good man. You have to believe me. He turned and fled, the door slamming shut behind him, leaving a sticky puddle of melted ice cream on the floor. The humming of the lights seemed to intensify, filling the silence that followed. Kevin stared at the closed door, a knot forming in his stomach. He knew Timmy. He was a bright kid, and he was devoted to Arthur. Could they be making a mistake? Brenda, oblivious to Kevin's internal struggle, turned back to Arthur, her expression hardening. All right, Penhaligon. Let's try this again. The Medal of Honor. Brenda, practically buzzing with nervous energy, flipped through the photo album with more enthusiasm than delicacy. Pictures of Arthur as a young boy, grinning gap-toothed at the camera, blurred past. Kevin, standing behind her, winced slightly, fearing for the fragile pages. Anything? Brenda asked, her voice tight. Kevin shook his head. Just family photos, Brenda. Let's be careful, all right? This belongs to him. Brenda huffed, turning another page with unnecessary force. Suddenly, a corner of something stiff and framed snagged. With a frustrated yank, she freed it. The object tumbled from the album, landing with a soft thud on the threadbare rug. It was a certificate, encased in a dark wood frame. The glass, clouded with dust, obscured the details, but Brenda grabbed it, wiping at the surface with her sleeve. As the grime cleared, gold lettering began to gleam. What is it? Kevin leaned in, his earlier caution forgotten. Brenda's breath hitched. Oh, my God. She held the certificate up to the dim light filtering through the window. The words swam into focus, the Congress of the United States. Medal of Honor. Presented to Arthur Penhaligon. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. The citation detailed a harrowing battle, a desperate stand against overwhelming odds, and an act of selfless bravery that had saved the lives of his entire unit. Arthur Penhaligon, the disheveled old man slumped in the armchair, was a war hero. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the silence broken only by the faint tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the hall. Mrs. Higgins, who had been hovering anxiously by the doorway, gasped, clutching her chest. Arthur? A hero? Kevin stared at the certificate, then at Arthur, his face a mask of disbelief. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him, a potent cocktail of shame and regret. He'd seen the man as a nuisance, a potential thief, a burden on society. He hadn't seen the history etched into his weathered face, the quiet dignity in his posture. Brenda, usually so quick to jump to conclusions, was speechless. The color had drained from her face, leaving her pale and shaken. She lowered the certificate, her hands trembling. The weight of her assumptions suddenly felt unbearable. Arthur remained slumped in his chair, seemingly oblivious to the drama unfolding around him. His eyes, clouded with confusion, were fixed on some distant point. Arthur, Kevin said softly, approaching him. Is this yours? Arthur blinked, focusing on Kevin with difficulty. He gestured vaguely towards the certificate. That? Oh, that's an old thing. He paused, a flicker of something, pride, crossing his face. Happened a long time ago. The understatement hung in the air, heavy with unspoken stories, with sacrifices made and honors earned. The room was thick with the weight of a life they had so carelessly misjudged. The real culprit. Mrs. Higgins, bless her inquisitive soul, shuffled back into the living room, a triumphant glint in her eye. "Officers," she announced, pointing a trembling finger towards the back door, "I believe I've found something of interest." Brenda Davies, ever the eager beaver, practically bounced out of her chair. "Lead the way, Mrs. Higgins. Evidence waits for no one." Kevin Miller, however, remained rooted to the spot, offering Arthur a sympathetic wince before reluctantly trailing after Brenda. The trail began innocently enough, a scattering of blueberry crumbs on the pristine linoleum. Brenda, notebook in hand, meticulously documented each tiny purple stain. "Exhibit A, blueberry residue," she declared, her voice echoing in the otherwise silent house. "This clearly indicates the perpetrator's route of egress." Kevin, meanwhile, knelt down, his brow furrowed. "Brenda, slow down. The crumbs seem irregularly spaced. Almost like they were dropped, not." He stopped mid-sentence. The crumbs led directly to the back door, which was slightly ajar. A faint rustling sound emanated from the garden. Brenda, ever impatient, threw open the door. "All right, freeze. Police," her voice died in her throat. Before them, bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun, sat a family of raccoons. Mama Raccoon, flanked by 3 adorable, albeit messy, kits, was happily devouring the remains of Mrs. Higgins's prize-winning blueberry pie. The air hung thick with the sweet scent of cooked fruit and the faint musk of wild animals. A half-eaten pie tin lay discarded on the grass, surrounded by a chaotic jumble of crust and filling. The raccoons, startled by the sudden intrusion, froze, their tiny black eyes wide with surprise. One of the kits, still clutching a blueberry-smeared paw, let out a squeak. Brenda's face flushed crimson. She stammered, raccoons?" Kevin, ever the pragmatist, simply sighed. "Looks like we found our culprits, Brenda." Back inside, Arthur Penhaligon sat slumped in his chair, looking utterly bewildered. The officers, humbled and contrite, approached him with apologies tripping over their tongues. "Mr. Penhaligon," Brenda began, her voice barely above a whisper, "we owe you a profound apology. We jumped to conclusions. We are so sorry." Kevin chimed in, "Yes, sir. We were entirely out of line. It appears we had the wrong suspect." He extended a hand, his face etched with genuine remorse. "We should have listened to you. About your service to your country. About the real nature of the threat." Arthur, still processing the bizarre turn of events, managed a weak smile. "Raccoons, eh? Clever little devils." He accepted Kevin's handshake, his grip surprisingly firm. As the initial awkwardness began to dissipate, a shared chuckle filled the room. The image of the pie-thieving raccoons, their masked faces smeared with blueberry filling, was simply too absurd to ignore. Even Brenda, usually so serious, couldn't help but crack a smile. "Well," Mrs. Higgins declared, her voice filled with amusement, "I suppose I can't stay mad at them. They certainly have good taste." The tension in the room finally broke. For the first time since the pie had gone missing, genuine laughter echoed through the house. A hero remembered. The scent preceded him, a fragrant promise wafting from beneath Mrs. Higgins' door, sun-ripened blueberries, a whisper of cinnamon, and a buttery foundation. He hadn't encountered such comforting aromas in ages. He straightened, smoothed the worn fabric of his coat, and rapped gently. The door opened, unveiling Mrs. Higgins, her apron dusted with flour, her face alight with a smile bright enough to banish any shadow. "Arthur, darling. Do come in. It's still warm from the oven. He entered, his gaze drawn immediately to the pie resting on the counter. It was a culinary gem, burnished gold with intricately scalloped edges, almost too perfect to disturb. "Blueberry, your favorite," Mrs. Higgins announced, her eyes twinkling. "After everything, I felt a simple apology wasn't sufficient." "You owed me nothing, Martha," Arthur mumbled, color rising in his face. "Just relieved the air's been cleared." The memory of Brenda's accusation still stung, but the inviting warmth of the kitchen, and the allure of the pie, began to soothe his ruffled feelings. Just then, a patrol car braked to a halt outside. Arthur's optimism faltered. Had they returned to take him away after all? Brenda and Kevin emerged, looking contrite. Brenda, unusually subdued, approached Arthur with a hesitant smile. "Mr. Penhaligon, we wanted to offer you a ride home." And a more sincere apology, this time. Kevin, ever the peacemaker, chimed in, "We'd be glad to give you a lift, sir." Arthur paused, then gave a slow nod. "All right. A ride would be welcome." Mrs. Higgins intervened swiftly. "Nonsense, Arthur. You can't depart without a slice. And these officers are welcome to join us." She brandished a pie server like a conductor's baton. Soon, they congregated around Mrs. Higgins' table, savoring slices of the warm, sweet creation. Brenda and Kevin listened, spellbound, as Arthur began to recount his wartime experiences, his voice growing stronger with each vivid recollection. He spoke of daring operations, narrow escapes, and the unshakable bond he shared with his comrades. The pie seemed to unlock something within him, releasing memories that had been locked away for years. Timmy, who materialized as if conjured, listened intently, his eyes wide with hero worship. "And there was this one time we were trapped behind enemy lines," Arthur chuckled, a glint of mischief in his eye. "Completely out of ammo, surrounded on all sides. I swear, all we had was a tin of peaches and a stubborn refusal to give in." Brenda, all traces of her earlier suspicion gone, leaned forward, riveted. "What did you do?" "Well," Arthur said, a wry smile playing on his lips, "let's just say those peaches proved remarkably disruptive. Made a proper mess for the opposition." After the last crumbs disappeared, Brenda and Kevin renewed their offer of a ride, which he accepted. As they drove, he pointed out local landmarks and shared colorful stories about the neighborhood, revealing a deep understanding and connection to the area that surprised them. Reaching his doorstep, Arthur turned to the officers, a genuine smile lighting up his face. "Thank you both. For the ride, and for listening." Brenda, finally finding the right words, burst out, "Mr. Penhaligon, you're a real hero. We misjudged you terribly. We have much to learn." Kevin nodded in earnest agreement. "We'll strive to do better, sir." Arthur simply smiled and offered a wave as he stepped inside, leaving the officers to contemplate the lesson they had just received. He might have appeared to be an unassuming old man, but beneath that exterior lay a history filled with courage, resilience, and stories untold. The aroma of blueberry pie still hung in the air, a sweet testament to the fact that appearances can be deceiving, and kindness is always rewarded.